Imagine the moment the physical heart gives its final thump. In our modern clinical setting, that's usually where the story ends. But according to the profound spiritual science shared by Paramhansa Yogananda, that heartbeat is actually the starting gun for the most significant journey your consciousness will ever take. We are talking about a specific 3-minute window, exactly 180 seconds, where the soul prepares to vacate the physical vessel. This isn't a passive fading away. It is a highly active, systematic transition. Think of it as a bridge, a narrow corridor connecting the heavy, material world we know to the vibrant, high-frequency astral realm. During these 3 minutes, the prana, or life force, begins a strategic withdrawal. It retreats from the extremities, your hands, your feet, your skin, and flows inward toward the central nervous system, gathering in the spine and the brain. Yogananda teaches that where you go next depends entirely on how you navigate this countdown. The body has various sensory gates: the eyes, the ears, the mouth. Most people, driven by a lifetime of sensory habits and physical attachments, are pulled out through these lower openings, often falling into a state called death sleep, a sort of unconscious fog. However, there is another way. By using the spiritual eye, the point between the eyebrows, as an exit, the soul can transition with full lucidity. This introduction sets the stage for a process that is both incredibly scientific in its physiological mechanics and deeply mystical in its spiritual implications. It's about moving from a state of biological cessation into a conscious graduation. We are going to dive into why this window matters and how a lifetime of meditative discipline can turn these 180 seconds into an act of ultimate liberation. Paramhansa Yogananda, the yogi who revolutionized Western understanding of Eastern spirituality, approached death not with dread, but with the precision of a scientist mapping uncharted territory. He described these final 3 minutes, these critical 180 seconds, as a systematic biological and spiritual withdrawal. Instead of a chaotic end, Yogananda frames it as the life force, or prana, retracting from the extremities, pulling back through the nervous system, and gathering in the central highway of the spine. Think of it like a grand theater closing down for the night. The lights in the lobby dim first, then the hallways, as all energy is focused back toward the main stage. Yogananda taught that this transition is a calculated withdrawal of the life-tron energy. For the average person, this moment is often met with what he called the death sleep, a state of clouded consciousness or confusion born from intense sensory attachment and the shock of the body's cessation. But for the practitioner who has cultivated meditative discipline, these 180 seconds are a window of immense lucidity and potential. During this period, the soul arrives at a crossroad within the cerebrospinal centers. The destination is determined by which gate the consciousness exits through. If the soul is pulled toward the lower sensory openings, like the eyes or mouth, it remains tethered to the material frequency. However, the aim of the conscious yogi is the spiritual eye, the kutastha, located between the eyebrows. Exiting through this portal is what Yogananda termed a conscious graduation. It's about the habitual focus we cultivate every day. By mastering energy through specific yogic techniques while alive, we train the soul to navigate these 3 minutes with peace, turning a frightening unknown into a purposeful transition to a higher frequency of existence. Imagine the body as a vast theater where the lights are being dimmed, not all at once, but seat by seat, row by row. According to Yogananda, this initial 180-second window is a masterclass in bioenergetic efficiency. It begins at the very edges of our physical presence, at the tips of the toes and the pads of the fingers. While modern medicine might view this cooling as a failure of the circulatory system, the yogic science of transition reveals something far more purposeful. This is the intentional harvesting of prana, the fundamental life force. As the warmth physically recedes from the limbs, that energy isn't just vanishing into thin air. It's being systematically withdrawn toward the torso in a process of consolidation. Think of it like a strategic retreat, where all available resources are being pulled back from the outposts to the inner citadel. This prana, which once fueled every blink, every breath, and every heartbeat, is now being collected for a final, monumental journey. It flows inward, abandoning the periphery to concentrate within the center of the being. This is where the spinal column becomes the most critical structure in the body.
In Yogananda's teachings, the spine isn't merely a stack of vertebrae. It is the primary conduit, the energetic highway for the departing consciousness. As the prana pools in the spine, it prepares for its final upward ascent. This is not a passive biological collapse, but an active gathering of the soul's vitality. For a trained meditator, this sensation isn't one of fading away, but of becoming incredibly concentrated. The extremities turn cold because the electricity of the spirit is being unplugged from the outer world to power the inner channel. It's a profound biological reorganization, turning the physical body into a launchpad for the consciousness to move into its next frequency of existence.
As we enter the very first 60 seconds of this critical 180-second transition, the primary experience is one of profound expansion. Imagine the sensation of your consciousness no longer being strictly contained by the boundary of your skin. It is a moment where the internal ocean begins to swell and the rigid shoreline of the physical body starts to dissolve. Yogananda describes this as the prana, or life force, systematically withdrawing from the sensory nerve extremities and moving toward the center. Think of it like a receding tide. The external world, which once felt so solid, loud, and urgent, begins to fade into a soft, distant blur. For those who have lived their lives entirely through the lens of the five senses, this sensation often triggers a reflexive, primal panic. It feels like losing one's grip on reality itself. However, for the seasoned practitioner of meditation, this is a familiar, even welcomed state of being. In the quiet of their daily practice, they have already learned the art of interiorization, essentially practicing how to unplug the energy from the telephone wires of the senses. Because they aren't startled by the fading of the physical environment, their focus shifts naturally and fluidly to the inner architecture of the astral body. This isn't just a metaphor. It is the subtle energy system, the spine and the spiritual centers, residing within the physical frame. During this first minute, the individual is effectively relocating their center of gravity. They are transitioning from a heavy biological machine to a high-frequency field of light. By maintaining this lucidity and peace, they bypass the instinctive, unconscious death sleep, turning what the world perceives as a cessation into a conscious, masterful withdrawal into the core of their true being. As we enter these critical 3 minutes, the physical body begins its shutdown, but the energetic body is embarking on its most significant journey. Think of the spine not merely as a stack of vertebrae, but as a central, luminous highway. Paramhansa Yogananda refers to this as the sushumna, the subtle spiritual channel located within the core of the spinal column. This isn't a physical nerve you'd find in a traditional biology textbook. It's the royal road of the soul. During this 180-second window, the life force, the prana, which has been scattered throughout your limbs, organs, and extremities, begins a rapid withdrawal. It pulls inward, converging at the base of the spine. Here, the spine transforms into a literal ladder. Each segment represents a higher state of consciousness, moving through the energetic plexuses toward the higher centers of the brain. The quality of this ascent is entirely determined by the spiritual work performed during one's lifetime. Yogananda teaches that the 180 seconds provide the necessary window for the soul to gather its essence and begin its deliberate upward climb. Every moment spent in meditation or practicing Kriya Yoga acts as a rehearsal for this very event, clearing the subtle debris from the Sushumna highway. If the channel is blocked by sensory attachments, the transition feels like a struggle. However, for those who have cultivated discipline, the life force flows smoothly toward the light of the spiritual eye. This ascent is the soul's final graduation, where the vital energy that once animated the physical form is refined and projected upward, transitioning from the density of matter into a higher frequency of conscious existence.
Now let's look closer at what is actually happening during this 3-minute window. A central concept Yogananda emphasizes is the existence of the sensory dates. Think of these as the various points of exit within the physical structure of the body. These gates include the sense organs, the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, as well as the lower chakras located along the spine. In these critical 180 seconds, the life force, or prana, is searching for a way out. But here is the crucial point. The direction that energy takes isn't random. It is governed by the law of habitual magnetism. If an individual's life has been dominated by physical appetites, material attachments, or purely worldly concerns, their life force naturally gravitates toward these lower exits. Imagine the life force as a current of electricity. If you have spent decades wiring that current to flow toward the senses, always seeking fulfillment through what you can touch, taste, or see, that path becomes a deeply etched groove in the subconscious. When the physical machinery of the body begins to shut down, the life force essentially pours out through these familiar, well-worn gates. The consequence of this is profound. If you exit through these lower sensory gates, you do not suddenly wake up as a liberated, enlightened being. Instead, you arrive at an astral destination that mirrors those specific lower vibrations. This often leads to a state of death sleep, or a transition characterized by fog and confusion. You find yourself in a limited state of existence because your consciousness is still tuned to the frequency of the material world. It is like trying to tune into a high-definition broadcast with an old analog antenna. The signal simply cannot clear the static of your previous attachments.
Instead of letting the life force simply leak out through the lower senses, the eyes, ears, or mouth, Paramhansa Yogananda points to a singular, luminous exit, the spiritual eye. This is the Ajna chakra, positioned precisely between the eyebrows. He often referred to this as the straight gate, mentioned in ancient spiritual texts. It's not just a metaphorical door. It is a specific energetic aperture through which the soul can transition into the higher dimensions of existence. During those critical 180 seconds, as the life force gathers within the spine and withdraws from the extremities, its ultimate direction depends entirely on where your attention has resided during your time on Earth. If you have spent a lifetime looking outward, tethered to the material world, the energy naturally gravitates toward the sensory gates. However, if you have cultivated the discipline of Kriya Yoga or deep meditation, you have essentially trained your life force to flow upward toward the brain. Exiting through the spiritual eye allows the soul to bypass the lower astral planes, those regions often described as heavy, foggy, or filled with the lingering attachments of earthly desire and confusion. Instead, the consciousness is catapulted directly into a state of immense clarity and radiant light. It is a conscious graduation into a higher frequency of being. The reality is that in those final 3 minutes, there isn't much room for deliberate new decision-making. The soul's exit point is chosen reflexively, dictated by the momentum of your lifelong habits. If your daily focus is anchored in peace and spiritual devotion, that is where the energy will naturally go. If it's anchored in physical craving, it follows that well-worn path. This is why the 180-second window is less a moment of chance and more a final crystalline expression of how you have lived every moment prior. Now, it's crucial to understand that these final 180 seconds aren't just a random roll of the spiritual dice. Yogananda emphasizes that the destination of your consciousness is determined by what he calls your habitual focus. Think of your mind like a landscape. Every thought you have, every desire you nurture, and every reaction you repeat creates a literal groove or a path in your consciousness. Over a lifetime, some of these paths become deep, well-worn canyons. During that critical 3-minute window, when the life force begins its withdrawal from the limbs and extremities, it doesn't wander aimlessly. It naturally follows the line of least resistance, flowing into the deepest groove you've carved. If you've spent decades focused primarily on the external world, the constant stimulation of the senses, the daily dramas, or material cravings, that energy will instinctively scatter toward the lower sensory gates. This creates that state of confusion or the unconscious death sleep that hinders the soul's transition. But here is where the practice of meditation becomes a literal survival skill for the soul. By practicing the inner pole daily, you are essentially engineering a new neurological and spiritual pathway. You are training the life force to bypass the senses and rise toward the spiritual eye, known as the kutastha, located between the eyebrows. In Yogananda view, this is a precise rerouting of energy within the astral spine. The most empowering part of this teaching is that the physical circumstances of death, whether it's a quiet passing in bed or a sudden accident, do not dictate the final destination. The soul follows its internal momentum. If the deepest groove you've carved is one of inner stillness, the life force will instinctively surge toward the light, ensuring a conscious graduation into a higher frequency. As we reach the 120-second mark, the internal landscape undergoes a profound transformation. We are now 2/3 of the way through the transition, and the soul often enters what is known as the panoramic life review. Contrary to popular belief, Yogananda explains that this is not a judgment handed down by an external deity or a stern gatekeeper. Instead, it is a rapid, spontaneous assimilation of the current incarnation's lessons. Imagine a high-speed data transfer where every experience, emotion, and motive is condensed into its essential spiritual frequency. You aren't just seeing what you did, you are feeling the vibrational impact of your life's choices, understanding exactly how your actions shaped your consciousness. At this precise stage, the consciousness is precariously suspended between two distinct realms. The physical brain is losing its electrical and chemical grip, its circuits fading like a dying star. Yet, as the physical senses dim, the astral senses begin to flicker to life. It is a moment of intense duality. You are witnessing the dissolution of a long-held physical identity, the name, the roles, and the body you've inhabited for decades. This period requires immense mental stability. Without the grounding of meditative discipline, the ego tends to panic as its foundation evaporates. The soul must remain centered in the self, while the I of the personality is stripped away. Yogananda teaches that this is why non-attachment is the ultimate preparation. If you can remain the calm observer during this 120-second threshold, you avoid the disorientation that leads many into an unconscious death sleep. You are standing at the very edge of the horizon, watching the sun set on your physical existence, while the first light of the astral world begins to catch your eye. It is the ultimate test of equanimity.
For the vast majority of people, the transition into the next phase of existence isn't a clear-eyed journey. Paramhansa Yogananda describes a phenomenon he calls the death sleep. Think of it as a spiritual circuit breaker. As the life force, or prana, begins that rapid withdrawal from the hands, feet, and limbs, moving toward the spine and brain, the physical system experiences a massive shock. It's an intensity the average consciousness simply isn't prepared to process. To protect the soul from overwhelming trauma of this sudden severance, the consciousness slips into a state of profound, heavy slumber. It's a bit like fainting during a moment of extreme physical pain. While Yogananda notes that this is actually a merciful mechanism, saving the individual from the raw terror of the body's final shutdown, it comes with a significant spiritual trade-off. Because the soul is effectively under anesthesia during those vital 180 seconds, the transition becomes passive rather than active. You aren't consciously choosing your exit gate through the spiritual eye. You're being swept through the process by the momentum of your past actions. This lack of lucidity means that when the soul finally wakes up on the other side in the astral realm, there's often a profound sense of disorientation. It's like waking up in a strange new country with no memory of the flight that got you there. You've arrived, but you miss the transition, and more importantly, you miss the window to steer your own destiny. In this state of death sleep, the soul loses the chance to take full advantage of the spiritual liberation offered at the moment of death. Instead of a conscious graduation, it becomes a clouded passage into a higher frequency, governed by habit rather than holy intent. While many individuals fall into a deep, unconscious slumber during the final transition, the disciplined yogi approaches those critical 180 seconds with a vastly different intention, the conscious exit. Imagine being fully alert as your own physical machinery begins its final shutdown. Paramhansa Yogananda describes this not as a terrifying collapse, but as the soul witnessing the body's dissolution with the calm detachment of a seasoned observer. During these 3 minutes, the yogi doesn't struggle against the withdrawal of life force, they consciously guide it. As the breath stops and the heart's rhythm fails, the practitioner maintains a steady, unwavering focus on the spiritual eye. It is the difference between being swept away by a chaotic tide and surfing a wave with absolute precision. This state of lucidity transforms death from a feared intruder into a long-awaited homecoming. It's a fundamental shift in identity, moving from being the physical form to observing the physical form. By staying awake through the entire 180-second window, the soul avoids the death sleep, that period of unconscious fog that usually follows the break. Instead of waking up in the astral realm disoriented or confused, the conscious soul arrives with their awareness and intention fully intact, ready to navigate the higher frequencies of existence immediately. This mastery is the result of years of meditative discipline, where one dies daily by withdrawing energy from the senses during practice. When the final transition arrives, the yogi is simply performing a familiar routine on a grander scale. They watch the lights go out in the physical house, knowing exactly where the exit is, and stepping through that door into the brilliance of the astral world, without ever losing the thread of their own being.
Think about what happens when you try to pull a tight ring off a swollen finger. There's friction, resistance, and sharp pain. In those final 180 seconds, Yogananda explains that attachment to the physical world acts exactly like that friction, a heavy psychological anchor dragging behind the departing soul. We aren't just talking about a love for material things, like a house or a bank account. It's much deeper. It is the attachment to our physical appearance, our social roles, and even the people we love. When the life force tries to withdraw from the extremities towards the spine, these mental ties create a turbulent resistance. Yogananda's teaching on non-attachment isn't about being cold or indifferent. It's actually a form of spiritual physics. He suggests we adopt the mindset of a tenant rather than an owner. Think about the difference. If you believe you own a house, you might fight tooth and nail when the lease is up. But if you know you are just a guest, you pack your bags and leave with grace. The body is a temporary rental, a sophisticated biological suit we've borrowed for a few decades. When we cultivate this realization through daily meditative practice, something profound happens during the transition. Instead of the soul being ripped away from the flesh, the life force slides out of the physical frame with the effortless ease of a hand slipping out of a silk glove. There is no snagging, no deck sleep, and no disorientation. By letting go of the anchor of mine and I, we allow the consciousness to accelerate into those higher astral frequencies without being pulled back into the density of the physical shell. It is the ultimate preparation for a lucid, peaceful graduation. We have now entered the final 60 seconds of this profound 180-second transition. At this stage, the life force, the prana, has completed its steady upward ascent through the Sushumna nerve and is now fully concentrated within the brain's highest centers. This is what Paramhansa Yogananda calls the moment of the great leap. It is the ultimate climax of the human experience. Imagine the soul standing at a cosmic threshold, perfectly poised between the discarded physical vessel and the vast, shimmering expanse of the astral world. In these final moments, the physical world has completely dissolved. The primary reality is now in overwhelming intensity of light and sound. The soul encounters what is often described as a great hum, the primordial vibration of Om, which resonates as a thunderous yet blissful roar. This is accompanied by a blinding radiance, a light so intense it transcends human vision. This is the absolute peak of the 180-second window. The soul is now positioned at the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus at the crown of the head, and the spiritual eye between the eyebrows. The direction of the exit is everything. To exit through the crown chakra is to ensure a transition into the highest possible frequency of the astral realm. This requires one last deliberate push of conscious will, a final graduation move. For those who have not prepared, the soul might drift toward the lower sensory gates, falling back into the unconscious death sleep of physical attachment. But for the yogi, this is a moment of total lucidity and peace. You are not ceasing to be. You are simply changing your broadcast frequency, stepping out of the physical shell and into a higher state of liberation. So, how does one actually prepare for those critical 3 minutes? Paramhansa Yogananda didn't just leave us with a theory, he provided a specific methodology, most notably through the practice of Kriya Yoga. He often described Kriya as a literal rehearsal for the transition of death. Think of it as a spiritual dry run for the soul. At its core, Kriya Yoga involves a specific psychophysiological method where the practitioner moves the life force, or prana, up and down the spine. By doing this, you aren't just relaxing, you are scientifically withdrawing energy from the sensory nerves. In yogic terminology, this is known as pratyahara.
When you practice this daily, you are essentially training your consciousness to decouple from the physical body at will. During the actual 180 seconds of death, the life force naturally begins to pull away from the extremities towards the spine and brain. For most people, this is a chaotic, frightening, and entirely involuntary process. But for the Kriya Yogi, this is familiar territory. They have performed this internal migration thousands of times in deep meditation. The sensation of the life force ascending the cerebrospinal centers is no longer a terrifying unknown, it's a well-traveled path. By mastering the ability to direct energy towards the spiritual eye during life, the practitioner ensures that when the final 180-second window opens, the exit is made with lucidity. You aren't being pushed out of the body, you are consciously stepping out. This daily discipline strips away the unconscious death sleep and replaces it with alert awareness. Ultimately, Yogananda taught that by practicing these specific spinal movements, we transform the end of life from a traumatic cessation into a graceful, conscious graduation into a higher frequency of existence.
Once those pivotal 3 minutes have elapsed and the life force has completed its final journey up the spine, the soul emerges into a reality that Paramhansa Yogananda describes with startling clarity. This isn't a void or a dark silence. Instead, it is a vibrant, multi-dimensional world of light and vibration, a realm that is, paradoxically, far more real and solid in its own way than the heavy physical earth we just left behind. Here, the specific gate used during the exit becomes the soul's primary navigational coordinate. For the practitioner who successfully directed their energy through the spiritual eye at the point between the eyebrows, the destination is a high-frequency state of existence. This region of the astral world is essentially a sphere of pure intelligence and creative thought forms. You aren't just a guest here, you are a participant in a reality where your thoughts manifest instantly into luminous colors and sounds that have no earthly equivalent. It is the difference between living in a dense, slow-moving liquid and suddenly emerging into the clear, boundless air. In this state, the soul is finally unencumbered by the biological machinery of the body. There is no decay, no hunger, and no physical exhaustion. But this isn't a final stasis. It is the beginning of a new, accelerated phase of spiritual evolution. Without the resistance of physical density, the soul can work through its remaining karmic patterns at the speed of light. This graduation into a higher frequency isn't just a change of scenery, it's a shift into a life defined by profound freedom from space and time, where the spirit continues its upward climb toward ultimate liberation, fully awake and conscious of its divine nature. As we reach the conclusion of this journey into Paramhansa Yogananda's teachings, we are left with a profound reframing of our final moments. Those 180 seconds are not merely a biological shutdown. They represent the ultimate opportunity for the soul to claim its eternal freedom. Think of it as a conscious graduation. For the unprepared, death is often described as an involuntary death sleep, a period of total unconsciousness where the soul is tossed by the heavy currents of past physical attachments. But for the practitioner, these 3 minutes are a technical, sacred process of liberation. The mechanics are precise and fascinating. As the life force, or prana, withdraws from the hands, feet, and external senses, it moves inward, gathering in the spinal highway known as the sushumna. This is the moment of the soul's final examination. Will the consciousness exit through the lower sensory gates, the eyes, ears, or mouth, drawn back by habit toward the material world? Or will it focus with laser-like intensity on the spiritual eye, the seat of intuition located between the eyebrows? Yogananda emphasized that our habitual focus during life dictates our trajectory in death. If we have spent our years cultivating inner stillness through meditative discipline, we do not meet the end as a frightening mystery. We meet it with lucidity and peace. By mastering the interiorization of energy while we are healthy and alive, we learn exactly how to navigate that final transition. We are not ceasing to be, we are simply shifting our frequency. We are graduating from the dense, limited vibrations of the physical plane into the luminous, higher frequency existence of the astral realm. Ultimately, death is not a wall, but a doorway, a deliberate, technical ascent into our true state of being.